Whatever your hand finds to do, work with all your might as to the Lord and not for man, for you serve the Lord Christ. Colossians 3:23. Hello, ladies. I'm so honored that you came to Homemakers Radio so that you can get something done while you listen. And we always start out with appearance, and then we go into talking about the home and maybe a little homemaking, and then dealing with people in your family or other places. And I don't have any comments on the YouTube channel, but you can go over to my blog where I have embedded this in a beautiful place where there aren't so many distractions from the YouTube channel. So please go over there and watch this on my blog, and you may leave a comment there. I don't have comments here. And so anyway, if you're new here, I just developed these so that you could have something to listen to. There isn't anything to actually watch. I won't be showing you how to make anything. But today I will show you my teacup. It's hydrangeas. Beautiful, isn't it? I haven't seen a teacup with hydrangeas on it. Now you can tell this is an antique because the handle is so tiny and you can barely grasp it. I don't use the antiques as much as but this had the beautiful pattern on it, so I think I got it at the Goodwill. And so it kind of goes with my outfit. And I always want to start out showing you my teacup. You've seen this one before. I'm recycling now. I now have 3 times as many videos as I do teacups, so I'm having to recycle my teacups. And I will be showing you a little bit later of a book that I have. And so if you have something you want to fold or wash, clean, any kind of tedious thing, even go for a walk if you'd like to listen to something, I hope I can be good company for you, and I hope that everything that I say is beneficial and can help you in some way, or just be an easy listening for you. I know we all have our favorites, don't we, of things that we'd like to listen to. I want to start out today with appearance. And why do I say appearance? Now, I also wanted to tell you that on my blog, on the left of the link of blog roll, it's called the blog roll, and it's linked, Pretty and Sweet Blogs, I finally got Fly Lady to stick there. I had a hard time because hers isn't really a blog. It's some kind of a .com, and I had trouble with it adhering to the blog roll, but it did. So it comes up, and I want you to go look for it because you can get on her site and print out some job schedules or some kind of a list for you to go by if you're having trouble getting started, if you're new to this, or if you're old to this and you're just running around in circles for some reason and can't seem to concentrate. It's always nice to have a homemaker's coach, and that's what Fly Lady is. And I've told you about Fly Lady in previous videos and what it was originally and how this goes. So I have a notebook where I have printed out a few things, but now I have it in my mind so I don't have to go and look. But she too always starts out with appearance, and the reason for this is no matter what kind of chaos is going around you. I can remember moving and waking up the next day, and here are all these boxes in the house, and things have been dragged out of the boxes that we needed temporarily or urgently, and I didn't know where to start. But if I went in the bathroom and I got a shower and fixed my hair, got dressed, did a little bit of makeup and some perfume, put my apron on, and I always felt like I was home, and I always felt like I had a chance of getting settled. And I want to talk a little bit about feeling and getting settled, and that is one reason for appearance, is the feeling of being settled. It helps your mind. And so it's something you can do for yourself that you have some control over, is your appearance. And it gives you self-dignity and at least puts you in a starting mode. I know it's kind of like a race, isn't it? You're in the starting line, and at least if you don't finish in the time that you wish, at least you were in the race. So get your appearance going, and then you will feel settled, I hope. And you know, the New Testament talks about the word settled in a couple of passages, and where it said, you know, that the God of grace would settle your hearts. And one of the things I think that appearance helps is that feeling of being settled, of being stable, and of being established. And so it just will give you a settled, grounded stability. So you also have more, when you get dressed and you take care of your appearance first, you have a feeling, I think, of having a purpose. It gives you a purpose. It's like a lady I knew, she would get dressed in the morning, and her life had been in kind of an upheaval. She had nothing to do with it. It's just that things happen, you know, to her and to her family. And she would get up and get dressed, at least have some kind of order. It creates some kind of order in your mind if you get dressed. And she would get up and get dressed, and then she'd say, "Now what, Lord?" so that she could figure out what she would do next. But I think it's really important, your appearance. And if you go to Fly Lady, you'll find out that she insists on getting dressed first. Now, one of the things is, if you get dressed no matter what, it creates stability in your life and makes you appear to be stable. I mean, there are people around, ever since I've known, who are always looking for a way to make you feel like you're crazy or unstable. But if you will get dressed, you know, some of these unstable people can stand around and screech things at you and accusations at you. I've seen this on some of the old television shows, all the old comedies that showed these people who were accusing other people of being crazy, just acting crazy, while the other person just sat there as calm as can be and was kind of orderly. So at least you will give yourself a message that you're going to mean business today, that you're going to be stable today, and that you are on top of things, even if you aren't. So it's such an important start. I've always been glad when I have had the temptation to think, you know, I just want to lay around today. I'm not going to bother to get dressed. I'll go fix my tea, and then I'll hang around in my robe for a while and my slippers. And I'm always so glad when I say, nope, I'm not going to do that. And I get ready, and no sooner am I fully dressed than there's somebody coming at the door to deliver a package, or somebody asking a question, and of course I live in the manse, you know, and that means the church members will be over impromptu, and so I always like to be ready for that, unless somebody decides to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and visit. That won't work. And so this is the thing about getting your appearance ready. And I would suggest you find some kind of formula for yourself as far as appearance that makes you feel happy about it. If you like a certain scent, and if that makes you happy, then wear it. And if it's going to help, anything that will help motivate you. You know, years ago there was, when the web first started in the olden days, there was a Homemakers reward system, and you could order. This company was so brilliant, and it was in England, I think, and you could order. It was supposed to be for friends and husbands and that acquaintances of a homemaker, and you could subscribe to a weekly program or a monthly program, and they would have a package that would come in the mail for these homemakers. You know, a set of really nice dishwashing liquid with rubber gloves, or a new towel, or just any kind of personal item that would just keep them motivated and keep them interested. And I think that's so important. And if you don't have that, you can just give it to yourself. Just go to the dollar store and get yourself some little treat for yourself or the home. And so the home is interesting, is forever. And no matter what kind of business you're in, you know, I have been a preacher's wife for a long time, so there have been a lot of people that have come through the church and then have passed away. And when I think of them, I don't think of the business that they worked for. I think of the home that they had, because we visited them. And that is what is going to be lasting in people's memories. And that's why I say, if you can, give your children a happy, carefree childhood. And a happy, carefree childhood is not one in which we jump up and take them somewhere first thing in the morning and don't see them for the rest of the day. And so if you want to give them a happy, carefree childhood, this is so valuable, because it's something they can draw on later on. I mean, I myself, if there's any kind of upheaval or stress, or I don't feel settled, I love that word, settled, I will just mentally fall back on some scene of my childhood, and someday I will read you my book about that, because it 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 has such a nice, it's such a nice grounding. It's such a nice, it feels like there is your stability and there's your roots. And so when you have a childhood memory that's good, it is so reassuring, and it will pick you up right away, and it's reassuring. So home is forever, and this is a place where no investment or time or of labor is wasted, and it won't be unrewarded. You know, I believe it was Solomon that said, was it Ecclesiastes? In all labor there is profit, and you might not see it right away, and especially a really young person doesn't see profit in labor. But if there is no profit in it that they can see right away, they have developed a skill in which there is profit. And also the importance of putting things away and keeping things in order also helps your brain to feel more orderly, and your thoughts to settle down. I love that word, settled. So the childhood scenes that we fall back on, if you can create them also for your own children. I know after I had written my story of my parents' adventure and how we were brought up, someone wrote something for a review and said there were very few parents that would have had the courage to provide such a childhood. And I thought that is really something. Do you have the courage to provide a happy, carefree childhood for your children? And someday I will read you that book so you can see what it is. I'm not saying you all have to go and live in the woods and drink water out of the creek, but just the principles of it. And so because you're doing your own family thing, you're not being run by another system. And so I would like to talk to you a little bit now about the house and about house elements, old-fashioned house elements, the things that we were happy with in the olden days. And I was just thinking about that the other day. You know, we have so many places now where we can go and see that the home is what it's all about. They're hoping people will come and buy things that are for the home, rugs and lamps and accessories and bedding and furniture. And it's so interesting because the beginning of it was we first get a house, and the house was just like a box. And the first thing we would do is find something to make curtains out of. You just always had a curtains over your windows, and the curtains weren't always drawn across. They were just there as a frame for that window. I thought that was interesting. And of course we used the calico from the flour sacks or whatever we could find to make these little curtains. And if a man was a bachelor and he lived in such a place, he was happy when he got married to have his wife make curtains, because it was a sign of being settled and a sign of having an established home. And of course it didn't remain a bachelor's house. He expected it to her to add this warmth to it. So curtains were really important. And then we always had a rug. Now these rugs were either hooked rugs by hand by someone we knew, or we did it ourselves, or they were braided rugs made from strips of cloth from old shirts or anything that we had, and we braid those rugs. And then you could crochet rugs too with rags. And after the rugs were furniture. Now in the olden days it wasn't common to go to a furniture store. I don't know where people got their furniture, but I know growing up our fathers just built it. You know, they built tables and chairs to sit on, and so we had everything we needed. But I don't remember a furniture store until I believe the 1970s. There were a few furniture stores around, but they were very expensive, and was very hard, you know, to get everything to match if you bought it one at a time and saved up. And pretty soon they would be gone, or the styles would change, and you'd be stuck with furniture that didn't go with anything. So when we were growing up, our furniture was just not created to go with anything, but our mothers used the cloths or doilies on top of it to protect the surfaces. And you never put a teacup or a coffee cup on bare wood. You always had something to set it on. And the other thing was we would have cushions, and cushions were very, very popular and well liked because women at home could make them. You'd get this little magazine in the mail, and it would show you how to make a cushion, and they just cheered up a plain couch. And often our couches were just wooden structures, and cushions helped so much. And then there was art, and our fathers and mothers painted their own pictures and hung them on the wall. That's where we got our art. Or they would cut it out of a magazine, a scene out of a magazine, and frame it, and often made their own frames. I'm trying to think what else we had. I probably missed something, but we did have lamps, and we did have a lot of things were actually made by artists, like artisans, and sometimes our lamps were made on a piece of log, and they were varnished, and they had a little carved black bear on it or something like that. And at the time, they were what we had, and then after a while, when furniture came out in mass in the stores, it kind of looked down on some of this other stuff, but now they're very popular again and very, very expensive. So these are some of the house elements. We didn't use paint because we lived in a log house, and they just varnished the inside of the logs. And so the other thing I want to talk to you about today is the shadow that we lived under. And you probably don't think so. A lot of you who are new to homemaking think, oh, I wish I were in the 1950s. I was born after my time, and I wish we were still in the 1950s when ladies were at home and they were homemakers and housekeepers. But you have to understand that even in the 1950s, when I was a child, that we lived under a shadow of doubts about homemaking, and it was when it had just started this onslaught against the idea of staying home, and people were trying to get homemakers to question it, and then they were trying to get them out of the house so they could, quote, contribute to society. Well, even Karl Marx said that women didn't contribute as much to the nation as at home as they could in the factories, and he said the same thing. So you know where that's coming from. But one of the things that we would do is we would hear people say that if you stayed home, you would be lonely, bored, and unfulfilled. Now, of course, we had never figured out how to answer that. We just kind of stare at people blankly. Oh, so if I stay home, I'll be lonely, bored, and unfulfilled. But of course, our mothers never allowed that because they kept us so busy. And you didn't dare say, I'm bored. Well, I don't have anything to do, because, oh my goodness, she had so much work for you to do. So you just kept your mouth shut if you were bored and read a book and were quiet about that, because she would put you to work. And if you felt unfulfilled or lonely, she'd also put you to work because it would keep your mind off of it. And I should read you sometime Taylor Caldwell's little article that she sent into, I believe it was a magazine called The American Spectator, in which she showed how her mother worked her so hard that she decided that she would choose the life of being a homemaker instead, because her mother was the original woman who thought women could work as hard as men, and kept her daughter quite occupied. It was written in the her mother was born in the late 1800s, but I will read that to you sometime online. So we lived under this shadow of this fear that we'd be lonely, bored, or unfulfilled. And even when you went to school or a dentist, they'd give you a piece of paper to fill out with all your details in it. Your name, your address, your phone number, and then they would have interests, and you'd have to write down what your interests were. And of course, they would insist that you had to have an interest outside of the home. And whether it was sports or something else. And so you lived under this doubt. It was designed to create doubt that you could be happy at home. So that's one of the reasons I'm doing these videos, is because some women still live under that shadow that if they're at home or they homeschool, it's not going to be enough. Everybody's going to be lonely, bored, and unfulfilled. But I think you'll find out that that's not exactly the way it is. So I want to talk a little bit about homeschooling, because now some of you might not have homeschooled, and you weren't homeschooled, but I'm homeschooling you. So when I'm finished with you, you can say you were homeschooled, because all it is a combination of a couple of things. And one is you might get a writing book, or you might get a reading book and a math book. But then, see, I homeschooled before we had any curriculum, so I had to teach out of what I already knew. And so I would just get books that we already had, or find something in the bookstore, find a useful magazine of some kind. And one of the, so you can't depend on curriculum. Now I showed you a couple of things like Old World History and Geography and New World History and Geography, but what these books are, because I've seen a lot of things in them that kind of follow along with what the state says happened, when I know for a fact that it was slightly different. And so what they do is they take the state school books and they just create another book and add a scripture or two in it. But what we should be doing is, the Bible is your core curriculum, and you add your Bible is what you add your other subjects to when you're trying to teach. You bring other subjects in. So in other words, I told you, if you read a verse in the Bible, you could dissect the sentence, you could find the verb and the subject and the predicate and all the other parts of speech, and then you learn parts of speech, and then you learn spelling, and then you learn handwriting. So it's the Bible with a curriculum added to it, rather than a curriculum with a little sprinkling of the Bible added to it. So don't depend on curriculum, but enjoy it when you have it. But don't depend on all of that, because it's all about developing a love of learning and a delight in learning. And so I wanted to also tell you that homeschooling, if you've been a homeschool mom, it never ends. Homeschooling never ends, because now you'll be going through the old curriculums and books, and you'll find that your children, who are grown now, liked the books so much they got their own, so now you're stuck with all the old ones. And that's what I'm doing right now, is going through some of them. But I wanted to tell you that I didn't depend on all of those, and they didn't answer the questions at the end of the chapters. These were just for interest, and that way they knew something. Because just because a child is sitting in a classroom 5 hours does not mean that he's absorbing everything. I can remember being very bored in school, waiting for some other child to finish reading aloud when it would be somebody else's turn, and you'd sit through 20 children reading aloud, and this is that type of group learning, and by the time it was somebody else's, the last person's turn, they were half asleep. And so that's why, even though you might answer all the questions at the end of a chapter of one of these school books, even the Christian school books, does not mean that you have absorbed it or that it was important. So you need to read it at least for an interest, and keep those books around for interest. But you can have other books, and today I do have another book. I've been going through my stuff. I'm making a terrible mess back there, but I know I have to go through them. It's good to take books and air them out, and so I have some of them open, and every now and then I'll flip some pages. And today I have the designs of William E. Poole. Now, years ago, and he was a Southern designer, but it looks very, very Victorian elements in it, and all the house plans are there with it. And I saw this in I believe, the 1980s. They were advertised in the original Victoria magazines, but it was extremely expensive. Oh, I did want it. And it talked about this guy named William Poole, who was an architect or designer, and he wrote for Colonial Homes and Southern Living, and he was greatly influenced by the Southern homes, and I believe he walked past them or drove past them a lot, and I always admired them. And He went to the School of Design at North Carolina State University, and he opened a firm in 1964. And he was a lifelong student of classical architecture. So this is what attracted me to this, is all these beautiful homes. And it says in here that it's southern, but let me tell you, the southern part of the U.S. was the original America, and so of course these homes were in that era in which a lot of these, we call them Victorian, but they were before that. They were more colonial. And it's interesting about these kind of homes because you can come to the soaking wet Northwest and see these historical homes in the same design as these, and they're still standing. If they're looked after, they're still standing. In fact, it takes 100 years to make them break down, and it has to be deliberate. And in the end, you'll have to burn it down because they were so well done, so well made, and apparently used the heartwood, and they also had insulation in them between. They had walls that far apart, and that's how they created this wonderful warmth. And they would double the walls. And I wanted to show you some of the pictures of these lovely homes that he has. I was so glad to get a hold of this because back in the 80s when this was being sold in Victoria magazine, I couldn't afford it, but I found it on the internet recently. So I'm very happy to have it, and I've got all the drawings now. And so I'll read some of the, and this would be something that I would have brought into my homeschooling. This would have been, I don't think you should depend on curriculum, boxed curriculum, from a homeschool supply company or from a Christian school. Just get maybe one or two that you need, and then go into real life and find a lot of other things that might interest your children or create interest in them, so they can see, because who goes back to a textbook? You know, Mr. S went to University of Oregon, and he had all of these, and he went to Western New Mexico University, and he had all of these books from the university, and he never ever referred to them or went back to them. They were just studying them to pass and to be qualified. And so what we want is to have books that you can use again, that are classical, that are timeless, and that you say are classical. We talked about classical last time, remember? So while it's interesting to have a math book, make sure that that math book is going to be useful to you and later on can be referred to. So, because some of these we never went back to, but we always went back to the ones that weren't school books, that were ordinary, that were books like this. And so I wanted to tell you that because this is so. So here's something called, it looks like Carrituck Cottage. He was 10 years old that first summer at the coast. When the tide was low, he could walk all the way to the legendary rock, examining small sea creatures trapped in the tide pools. Other times he ran along the high bluffs or dreamed of pirates and sailing ships. The coastal surroundings of his childhood had a profound effect on his career, and he became one of the greatest artists of our time. Artistic demands have extended his travels, but he has never found a place he'd rather be in. In this cottage home, he is comfortable. Now, I don't know whether that's talking about the author or talking about someone else, but every single one of these house plans has a description on it written by him, and I find that interesting. Like, here's one called Bromley Court. I'll have to show you pictures of that later. Never have I seen such gentle and lush countryside as the rolling hills of England. It is today as it is must have been throughout the yesterdays, deep grazing, sheep grazing, stone walls, and quaint little villages along the way. Now and then was a great house, classic balance, and elegant in detail. Such is Bromley Court, a very English Georgian dwelling, and they have a lot of those in the southern areas, and starting to build whole streets of them here. So I want to read a little bit more about what he says about some of these houses that he designed. This one's called the Southerly. climbing plants, laughing children, swaying Spanish moss, barking dogs, winding paths, trotting horses, piano keys, and mint juleps. A glimpse of the southerly brings all of these settings and more to mind. With all of its grandness and spaciousness, the southerly is truly a fine example of a southern-style house. Now, they say in the beginning these are all southern houses, but I've seen some of them here. And anywhere you go in the world, you can see houses like this because their design was so sound and so settled that they lasted throughout the time. Now, this one's a shingled cottage. A shingle, you know what a shingle is. All along the Gulf Highway, one cannot help but, you know, the Gulf of Mexico is that place between Texas and Mexico, and down there where all those little towns are that I just love. All along the Gulf Coast Highway, one cannot help but admire the beautiful homes that seemingly go on forever. Shingled cottages with columned porches sitting amid floating lawns and large shade trees. Hold out an inviting hand to come and dream your dreams right there. In a large old rocking chair with a cool glass of lemonade and an unending view of the sea. Neighbors are friendly, visitors are welcome. Ma'am and sir are the norm, and life is good, as it should be. And he's named this house the Biloxi. I just thought that you might be interested in some of this. And ladies, I'm going to keep this short today, so if I do another short one, then you can have continuous play and play this. But I want to talk a little bit about people before I quit. So if you've got something to do, you can continue. So we'll start with someone asked me in a comment to please share a little bit more about guarding your heart and your mind, and especially your mind. Well, first of all, whatever you think will have a profound effect on your body, on your health. This is so interesting. And of course, if your body is ill, it'll have a profound effect on your mind. It's amazing how they all work together, isn't it? Everything just works together. And so one of the things is that your mind and your body have to be treated in almost a similar fashion. For instance, your body, you clean it, you nourish it, you protect it, you exercise it, and you don't expose it to anything harmful. But we don't think of the mind that way, but we should. It has to be nourished by good reading material, good thoughts, and the things that you hear that are, what would you say, wholesome. And you have to exercise it. And, you know, the Bible talks about exercising the mind. And when you exercise the mind, then you're thinking creatively, and you're thinking intelligently, and you're trying to figure things out, and you're challenging your mind more in reading. And also you have to protect it because, you know, the world wants to sully your mind. The world, and you know, I talked about how you can go to the grocery store and people are real picky about their food, and they'll read the label to see what the additives are, if there are any added ingredients. But we do have, thank goodness for the web, because now we can get on there and look up a book maybe that we'd like to have, or a movie that we'd like to watch, and we'll see maybe a Christian site that will say, warning, this movie does not have good, it's not a cheerful movie, or a book that maybe doesn't have pure speech, and you can be warned before you get it, before you get into it. Years ago, when the books and the movies started to deteriorate, some of us who had grown up reading good books thought, well, it's, you know, a book is a book, we could just read this story, and it would take you somewhere you didn't want to go and wouldn't warn you about it. But now you can find out about it, and you can protect your mind, because sometimes things that get in your mind will replay themselves over and over, and it'll haunt you, and it will, what do I say, take up your thoughts, make you nervous, unhappy, and we don't want that. We especially don't want that for our children. That's why I warned you about accepting a book just because it was considered a classic. You have to find out, is it good for them? Will it nourish their minds? And you have to protect them and protect their minds, and you don't expose your body or your mind do anything that's harmful, because you know you're made in the image of God and your mind belongs to Him too. You know, the Bible says love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And of course we don't have any trouble with our hearts or our souls, because you know we're Christians and we attend worship and we believe. But when it comes to the mind, we have no trouble. Some people have no trouble turning on that awful news and letting it fill up their day every 5 minutes, and then they wonder why they start to feel unsettled. And you will feel unsettled if you expose your mind to such poison. So then another thing I'd like to talk about is these people that every now and then you run into somebody. And I've been a preacher's wife for a long time, so every now and then, and I used to be quite confused about it, but I'm starting to see the light a little bit, is a question that's wrapped up in an accusation. Okay, here's how they do it. Why do you women refuse to go to work outside the home? Why do you refuse to send your children to the public school? Why do you refuse to eat junk food? Why do you refuse to go out at night? Why do you? And so they use that word refuse, assuming that you are in rebellion, or assuming that you're hard-headed. It does assume something, doesn't it? Instead of saying, why do you choose to stay home, or why did you decide to homeschool? They'll say, why do you refuse to do such and such? And I've ran into this many times, and I see the accusation there. Why do you refuse to? Now, we once drove to the coast, and when we got there, the weather just turned awful, and we couldn't even get out of the car. The wind and the rain were so bad, and you couldn't see the ocean anyway, so we were sitting in the car, and there were people that were getting out of their cars and going down there, and I heard somebody say, these people that refuse to get out of their car. Well, this is the way that they twist it, and this is the way the news media will twist things too. They will say, so-and-so refused to comment on this situation, and they didn't refuse, they just didn't comment. And I've seen that before, and it didn't just start now. It's an old tactic. Why do you refuse to do something? And so when they started saying things like that, I would say, I'm not refusing to use the public school. I have to homeschool them. You can't do both. And this is the route that I chose. This was the method that I chose to do. And or they will say, why do you refuse to join this group that's planning all the parties? And I'll have to say, I didn't refuse, I just wasn't able to put it in my schedule. But you see how they twist it? Why do you refuse? And sometimes somebody would say, I heard a man say to somebody, why did you refuse to bring me a cup of coffee this morning? And his wife said, I didn't refuse, I didn't even know you wanted one, but if you want me to do it every morning, I will. All you have to do is inform me, and I'll do it. But she wasn't refusing, she just didn't know. And so they use this to twist your mind and make you feel guilty. And so I've heard that, why do people refuse? And just because someone's not doing something that you believe you should do doesn't mean they're refusing to do it. Maybe they just aren't able to do it, don't want to do it. Maybe they're not refusing. And especially since they're using this word refuse to indicate that there must be a law that someone's breaking, and it isn't true. So you've got to really watch, because the media does this a lot too. They will say, the senator refused to comment on such and such. Well, they never even asked the question. They never even suggested any kind of information that he could refuse. They just created this news out of thin air. So I wanted to bring that up to you, because that is one of the problems. And I think that sometimes even in the home, you'll get a child that will say, Mom, why did you refuse to make me cookies? And they kind of do it just because foolishness is wrapped up in the heart of a child, and it's just something the natural that comes from immaturity to say something like that. So this is where we need to tell them, I didn't refuse to do something, I just wasn't able to do it, or I didn't know that this is what you wanted. But nobody's refusing to do something. It's what when you say, when the press says something like the senator refused to comment on something, he's also hinting that there's some kind of resistance going on, and it might not be true at all. And here it is years later, and I'm looking back and thinking, I believe that trick's been played on me several times to just make me feel so inferior or to hang my head in shame because I didn't actually know I was refusing. Like somebody would say, why do you refuse to write to me? I didn't know I was supposed to, and I wasn't refusing, I just didn't have time. So this is, the subject of this is questions wrapped up in a accusation, or accusation wrapped up in a question. You've got to watch for that. Okay, I wanted to bring up again one thing that I had said in my last video that has just been going over and over in my mind, and that was the story called Love Comes Softly by Jeanette Oak. And I remember the exact quote now, and I remember Sarah telling Marty, who was new to the West, to the Wild Wild West, back in the, I believe, 1900s or late 1800s, and she said, Marty, there's no room in this part of the country to waste time crying about your wants. Your life's about needs now. To teach her that you have to think about what's important. She said, winter's coming on and you're going to have a place to live. So she couldn't go back to the east because it would take too long, and you don't want to be stuck in the winter traveling the way they did in the wagons. So she said, there is no room in this country to waste time crying about your wants. Your life's about needs now. She said, winter's coming on. And so, some of you that are in the southern hemisphere now, and you're going into winter, and it can be quite dreary. Remember that. Of course, we want it to be bright and sunny, and we want to go to the beach, and we want to be happy. And here we are, going to be a little bit more confined than usual, and it's going to be cold and not pleasant, but you have to think about your needs, and you've got to think about what will help the most. So I wanted to just tell you that before I go, and I hope that you have a lovely day. I'm sorry I didn't make this as long as the other ones, and just keep giving me ideas, but you'll say something in your comments that often give me a memory or an idea of something that I probably should talk about to you. So please keep those comments coming, and thank you very much for all your prayers. Thank you for all that you do for me and for your donations, which help a lot. And so I'll see you next time. God bless. Bye.